Hi guys, I hope you're all doing okay. My name is Jen Grieves and I've lived with type 1 diabetes for 24 years. It's been a minute since I popped up on YouTube, so I thought I'd just say hello and talk a bit about where the hell I've been for the past 6 months and more specifically the mind bend that was trying to get through 2020 with type 1 diabetes. So this is in no way a pity party. It's not a really sad video or anything like that. It's just all part of that glorious, messy tangle of life, and I wanted to talk a bit about those bits, particularly in relation to 2020, because the more vulnerable side and the more vulnerable parts of us are the bits that we try so hard to cover up and pretend aren't there or aren't happening. And actually, in my experience, I think those are the bits that we need to talk about more. So here we go. So right now we're here in the UK in full lockdown in January 2021, which is exactly how this all began for us in March 2020. And I remember feeling back then that it was action we needed to take. It was very drastic, it was very necessary, but overwhelmingly that it would all be temporary, that we just stayed at home and collectively did what we needed to do to be able to emerge a few weeks or months later and go back to normal. In solo lockdown in March 2020, I was pretty productive-ish. I was, okay, and I just did the things that I love and care about in order to keep myself healthy and sane. For me, that was being creative, establishing some sort of routine within that, slowing down but not stopping completely. Regular runs kept my insulin sensitivity up, which is something I really wanted to try and keep going, because normally I do run around London and I don't have a car, so I walk everywhere, and I really wanted to try and keep that ticking along. So I found that helped me personally. I switched off the news and eventually Twitter because it was making me feel quite stressed and anxious, and that was creeping my blood sugars up slightly, and a general sense of loose structure and routine around my days, even when I didn't have that much to do, did help me to manage my type 1 diabetes. Everyone responds to stress differently. Everyone knows what works for them in terms of managing their type 1 diabetes, and it was about finding my way within the constraints of a global pandemic that none of us had ever experienced before. There were definitely days where I drank some wine, there were definitely days where I reached for the ice cream, and definitely days where I was less productive than I would have liked, but I just kind of went with it. There was also that overwhelming sense of collective conscience that really bolstered me, I think, and helped keep me sane, because it really did feel like we were all in it together. Then we hit summer and we tentatively started to step outside into the world again and shop in shops again and meet in parks and think about holidays, and it felt like the world was slowly ready to open back up. And at this point when things were moving forward, is where I got stuck and found myself starting to unravel a little bit. I count myself so completely lucky that I haven't lost a close family member, as so many people have, and I've got a safe space to be locked down in, and I haven't had to run into the fire to help save lives or to go to work to keep shops and things open. I know there are so many people going through unimaginable pain and grief. That being said, as we are all aware, this pandemic has seeped into so many aspects of people's lives, from their livelihood, their well-being, their mental health, their physical health, and of course that is quite pertinent as someone living with type 1 diabetes. I had an abundance of time for the first time in my professional life, which is always the thing that I claim never to have enough of, like most of us, to pursue all these creative things and these side projects and these things I want to do to try and connect with people and help people. And here it was all of this time, and I could not muster a single creative thought. I was questioning everything. I felt like I had nothing to offer, nothing to contribute, nothing to say, and I was just floating with no anchor or grounding, and it was so incredibly disconcerting. At the time and throughout all of this, I knew what I was feeling was completely circumstantial, so I managed to thankfully hold on to that. I had a house move in flux, I had a lack of solid work, which for me is normally quite demanding but therefore also very rewarding. It brings me a lot of friendships and human connection. So there was a lack of geographical stability, a lack of purpose, and also just a real lack of human contact, just hugging people and things like that. That brings me so much. Making memories and having experiences with other human beings is a big part of my life, and I think the combination of all those things was where I suddenly felt quite unsteady. There was also this sense of unease back in the summer, that this threat was still lingering. It was like an ambient dread, and it could go from barely there, pretty, non-threatening, to completely physically palpable within the space of a news bulletin, and back again, a few minutes later. And that I struggled with, because within the confines of lockdown, it's so clear what you need to do and what's safe and what's not. But this kind of tentative stepping back out was where I felt very unsure. And on top of that, there was this huge sense of guilt, and I know people have felt this as well, of feeling self-indulgent or entitled because you are daring to feel bad at all, when I personally felt never more aware of how much I had and how much I had to be thankful for, and how much other people had lost. But I just could not shake these feelings, and they were making me feel worse because I felt guilty about the fact that I was feeling them in the first place. And then on top of that, of course, you've got the small matter of a chronic illness, which at one point in the summer was just splashed all over the headlines. On that note, if you are someone who's finding yourself getting increasingly worried as the cases in the UK rise around diabetes and what exactly the threat is for all of us, then I would like to point you in the direction of a podcast episode I did for my podcast Type 1 on 1 with Dr. Partha Kar, who is Dr. Partha Kar OBE as of this month, and deservedly so. Congratulations, Partha. Partha is one of the most knowledgeable, experienced, wisest people in the NHS when it comes to diabetes, and he did a very special COVID Q&A episode with me in the summer and answered all of your questions around what we should be worrying about, what the risks are, and more importantly, what we don't need to be worrying about and what we can let go. And he's really brilliant at just keeping things calm and rational and sticking to the facts. So I will link that below, and I would encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. Obviously, that episode was recorded some 6 months ago, and our understanding of the virus and this new strain and everything like that has evolved and moved on from them. So just to caveat that, that information was as it stood at the time of recording. As you can probably tell, it's getting dark. We are in the winter months, and as ever, I have timed this really badly, so apologies for the changing light situation. Back to the untethering. So I was in this for some weeks, and it was like a paralysis and an inertia and a numbness all at the same time. It sort of came in peaks and troughs, as is the way with emotions, and I just had never experienced anything like this sense of strange, gloomy, weird melancholy before. Don't get me wrong, I've been sad and I've been incredibly sad, but this was such a strange feeling. But then I guess, who has experienced a global pandemic before in these conditions at this time, and me in my personal circumstances within that. Incidentally, throughout all this, my type 1 diabetes was and continues to be unwaveringly one of the most consistent things in my life, which for anyone living with type 1 diabetes knows is so ironic, it's laughable, because it is one of the most inconsistent things out there in terms of managing it day to day and its behavior and the way it likes to just keep you on your toes. But it relied on me. It was a very audible, very real reminder that every single day I needed to show up, and it depended on me. It needed me when my work didn't really need me in the same way that it normally would, and I couldn't reach friends. I often say the worst part about living with type 1 for me isn't the big scary moments, it's the routine mundanity of it all, of having to go through this each and every day. But at that time, I think the practical demands and the logistical necessities of having to check my blood sugar and having to change my insulin pump every 3 days and having to make sure I still had enough insulin in the fridge, that became the most normal thing about what was going on, because I've been doing it so long, and that in itself became an anchor in its own chaotic way. I've said this elsewhere as well, but I do believe the resilience that's been demanded of us over the past year is something that many people have experience of in different ways, and certainly I think that is the case when it comes to living with type 1 diabetes. The never-ending need to adapt and work with fluctuating circumstances, and the constant requirement for duty, and the need to keep going even when you feel quite broken by it all. The ridiculous, bizarre, surreal situations and things that change very quickly, the moments of sudden vulnerability, and then suddenly it all feels okay again. I mean, sounds familiar, doesn't it? That was a tangent, but a valid one. So slowly and steadily, and as is the case with the passing of time, I began to catch up with myself, to adapt and regroup, and this was aided hugely by plenty of friends who I knew were feeling the same. We sort of gravitated towards each other very naturally, those of us who spotted each other lurking quietly in Zooms or in WhatsApp groups, and found each other and found that need to hold on even though we couldn't physically. You know, we were drawn together in some ways, and I'm so grateful for those people who also felt willing to say that they weren't doing so great, because it sometimes can feel like it's only you that's not quite got it all figured out. And it's important to say that within 2020 and the chaos, there are so many moments that I will absolutely cherish, and I think they've been made even more special because they're all quite simple. And after going without these things for so long that we otherwise maybe would just take for granted, they felt so special. And I want to continue to appreciate those things, which I think I do anyway, because when you live with something like type 1 diabetes, all the kind of small things matter and they're meaningful because you spend so much time and energy dealing with this absolute beast. But I mean, the first time I hugged a friend, I cried, and it had been, I don't know, a few months, but that is a really long time for someone who likes to hug people. The first time I bought a coffee from my local coffee shop once it reopened, I was so overjoyed. I think I even wrote an Instagram post about it. And just being able to sit with someone in a park, even at a distance, and have a real chat with the energy that you get that you cannot get when you are doing it over a screen, those are things I will absolutely cherish. The night I laughed so hard, I woke up feeling next day like I'd run a marathon, and I had the low blood sugars to prove it. These beautiful things that have come out of 2020, we've got this real painful but humbling renewed awareness of the fragility of life, and I do hope that stays in our minds when this is all over, whenever that may be. And there, you know, the acts of kindness and the sense of love and unity, those lovely things that did come to the forefront in 2020, I'm clinging on to with everything that I can. So I don't really have a conclusion. It's just me popping up saying hello, and I hope you're all doing okay. I'd really love to hear how you are and how you've been getting on and how you feel in relation to your type 1 diabetes and life in general, and I hope there's pockets of hope and light for you. But I just wanted to say hi and check in, and again, kind of chat all this through, because I think it's important that we don't pretend it's all perfect and all fine. And actually at the moment I generally feel okay, and I know that that might change in 2 hours time, it might change tomorrow, and if not, it certainly will change at some point down the line, because the human state is not fixed and we're still in this situation. It's not like we've come out of it, unfortunately, but I think we have the lessons of experience. I guess we kind of know a bit more what we're in for this time, and I know there are people across the world that aren't locked down, and I'm so glad for that. And I hope if you are in that situation that you're making the most of your days, however that looks for you, whether that's going at 100 miles an hour or keeping it slow and steady. I am going to just take this one day at a time this time, and that's all we can do really. I've got no grand plans. I am not planning to become a master sourdough bread baker or learn 5 languages. I'm going to put one foot in front of the other and just try and get through. Do come and say hi and let me know how you're doing. I'd love to know. I'm always generally over on Instagram. You can find me there. All the links are below. And otherwise, I shall hopefully talk to you again soon. Just sending you big hugs, loads of love, and do stay safe and take care. Bye.